3 days before Christmas in 2022, Denver was wrapped in snow and golden streetlight glow. The jazz version of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas floated from passing cars as I trudged up the stairs to my tiny apartment off Colfax, my breath fogging in the freezing air. My name is Claire Mitchell, and I was just coming off a grueling double shift at the community clinic, hands still numb, heart aching in a way I couldn't quite name. The apartment was quiet, warm, with the faint smell of cinnamon, and my suitcase sat packed by the door, pine green scarf folded neatly on top, a stack of carefully wrapped gifts beside it. I'd found the right kind of nutmeg, tracked down Uncle Phil's favorite toffee, remembered every detail, like it might be the year it finally mattered. When my phone buzzed and my brother's name Aaron flashed on the screen, I smiled instinctively. "Hey, Bear," I said, using his old nickname. But his voice was careful, not warm. "Claire, just a heads up, Maya's coming this year." I paused. His new girlfriend, the one who saged the living room because I work in hospice care. He continued slow and rehearsed, "And the energy you bring, it's just a lot for her. So maybe this year you take a break." His words hung in the air, unreal, and then my mother called. I didn't answer my mother's call right away. I just stared at the blinking lights on my secondhand Christmas tree, watching them blur as the weight of her impending words pressed in. I already knew what she'd say. I knew the tone she'd use, the same one she used when telling me to be nice to Aaron, even when he broke my favorite snow globe at 9, or don't make a scene when he showed up 3 hours late to my med school graduation. When I finally picked up, her voice was exactly as expected, soft, sweet like honey over steel. "Sweetheart, we just want things to be peaceful. You know how sensitive Maya is. If you come, it might make her uncomfortable. Honestly, if you show up, we may not open the door." She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just said it like it was logistics, like she was telling me we were out of ham. And I didn't argue either. I just stood there in my hallway, the phone pressed to my ear, the room dim and quiet, except for the hum of my old radiator and the snow tapping gently at the window. My eyes fell to the small stack of wrapped gifts, each one chosen with thought and care. A pair of cashmere gloves for Dad's arthritis, the fancy olive oil Mom mentioned offhand in August, a music book for Aaron's latest guitar hobby, things that meant I listened, remembered, cared, things I knew wouldn't be missed now. I let the call end without another word. I stood still for a long time, then slowly walked to my laptop. I opened my bank account and clicked through familiar screens like muscle memory. The automatic transfer for my parents' property taxes canceled. The monthly deposit into Aaron's film equipment fund stopped. The co-signed car insurance policy for my dad terminated. I wasn't furious. I wasn't spiteful. I was just done. A different kind of silence filled the apartment, not empty but grounding. For years, I believed, if I stayed useful enough, gave enough, kept showing up with casseroles and calmness, I'd eventually earn a seat at the table, not just physically, but emotionally. I thought dependability would one day make me indispensable. Instead, I'd become convenient, expected, taken for granted. I moved slowly through the apartment, turning off the tree lights, sliding the wrapped gifts into the hall closet, like they were too tender to look at. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped. And in that stillness, something inside me clicked into place. For the first time, I didn't feel like the problem. I felt like a person finally seeing things clearly. Outside, snow had started to fall again, soft and certain. I pressed my hand to the glass, and for once I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I felt like I was finally walking away. But that night, as I sat with my peppermint tea cooling in my hands, I had no idea how much louder my absence would become than all the years I showed up in silence. The next morning, I woke to an unusual stillness. No buzzing phone, No texts asking if I could quickly look at someone's W-2. No Venmo requests disguised as family emergencies. Just quiet. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the snow settle into Denver's corners like a fresh start. For years, my worth had been tied to how quickly I responded, how quietly I showed up, how much I gave without question. Now that endless loop had finally paused. I sat at the kitchen table and opened a blank notebook, something I hadn't done in a long time. I began listing everything I'd done for them over the years, not to punish myself, but to finally see it. The car payments, the property tax bills, the surprise root canal, the late rent for Aaron, the physical therapy sessions Mom skipped out on paying. There were dozens, maybe more, some small, some staggering, all invisible. I had told myself it was love, that this was what good daughters did, that being needed was the same as being valued. But looking at the list, I felt a strange clarity, not rage, not grief, just truth. I had poured myself out year after year into a family that accepted the help, but not the person behind it. The phone rang again that afternoon. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me knew to answer. It was Aunt Bev, my mom's older sister. We hadn't spoken in a while, not since she moved to Oregon. "Claire," she said slowly, "I heard you're not going to the Christmas party this year." I laughed softly dry. I wasn't exactly invited. She was quiet a beat too long. "Well, it's making waves. Your mom's upset. Aaron's acting like you ruined something." I let the silence stretch. "I didn't even show up," I said. "That's the point, honey," she replied. "Your absence is louder than your presence ever was. They don't know what to do with that." Something tightened in my chest. Not guilt, just the recognition of what she was really saying. For so long, I'd kept everything running from behind the scenes. And now that I'd stepped back, the cracks were beginning to show. That evening, while making soup, I received a group email from my parents and Aaron. The subject line read, "Let's reset." It felt like a company memo, cold and polished, full of vague phrases like heightened emotions and family unity. But halfway through was the real reason they reached out. They wanted me to talk to Maya to smooth things over, to help her see they weren't bad people, not because they missed me, not because they understood, but because Aaron's image had taken a hit. Maya had posted something. I didn't know what yet, but I could feel it building, a shift, a crack in their carefully curated story. I closed the email, leaned back in my chair, and stared out at the snowy street. For the first time, it felt like maybe I wasn't the only one finally seeing things for what they were. I didn't respond to the email. I didn't need to. For the first time, their words felt weightless, like they were floating in a space I no longer occupied. That night, I lit a single candle and sat quietly at my desk, wrapped in the same blanket I'd had since college, its frayed corners a comfort more honest than any family sentiment I'd received in years. The snow outside kept falling soft and certain. It covered the sidewalks and rooftops like nature was trying to reset the world for me. I didn't play any music. I didn't reach for my phone. I just let the quiet surround me like a balm. It was strange at first, the stillness, the absence of obligation. But it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like space. Real rare space I'd never allowed myself to claim. The next day, just after dusk, my phone buzzed again, 3 times. A group text I almost ignored until I saw a familiar name, Maya. She hadn't messaged me directly, but someone had forwarded the post she'd written. It wasn't dramatic. It was piercing. She had written about family gatherings that erase people with silence, about the danger of rewriting someone's identity to protect comfort, and the way certain voices in a family are kept quiet, not because they're wrong, but because they disrupt the image. I read it once, then again, this time slower. She didn't name anyone, but every word cut with the accuracy of someone who had finally seen the truth and couldn't unsee it. At the bottom she wrote, "There are people we exclude not because they've done harm, but because their presence reminds us of the harm we're avoiding." I sat back, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and strange validation. I barely knew Maya, and yet she'd spoken aloud what I had swallowed for years. I imagined the dinner table, the awkward tension, the frozen smiles, the photo on the mantel where I'm barely visible in the corner, age 11, laughing mid-bite in a hand-me-down sweater. I could picture her seeing it and really realizing who I was, that I wasn't just Aaron's complicated sister. I was someone, a doctor, a human being who had spent her life quietly holding the broken pieces together while being treated like the crack itself. Later that night, Aunt Bev called again. Her voice was softer this time. "Claire, I think you should know Maya left early. She didn't cause a scene or anything, but she said some things that hit people hard. Your mom was crying." Aaron looked like someone pulled the rug out from under him. There was a pause. It wasn't what she said exactly. It was the fact that it came from someone outside the family. That's what rattled them. I closed my eyes. For years I had been shouting with my actions, hoping someone would hear what I couldn't say aloud. Now someone finally had. And I had a feeling the silence I left behind had just started to speak louder than anything I'd ever said. The fallout came quicker than I expected. By morning, my inbox had 3 new emails, one from Aaron, one from my mom, and one from a shared family address I didn't even realize was still active. None of them mentioned Maya's post directly, but each one echoed the same carefully chosen words: confusion, miscommunication, holiday stress. Not a single "we're sorry," not a single acknowledgement of the years I gave. Instead, tucked neatly into each message was the same quiet request: would I please reach out to Maya and help smooth things over? Not because they suddenly saw me, not because they finally understood what they'd done, but because Aaron's name was now being quietly whispered in circles he cared about. His image had taken a hit. His curated brand of charm and creativity was now sitting under a shadow cast by someone who'd simply paid attention. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too busy feeling the strange weight of being seen, not for the roles I played or the emergencies I handled, but for me, Claire, the one who stayed late with patients no one remembered, the one who sent money without being asked, the one who never needed credit but always gave it. I didn't need to say a word. Maya had spoken for me in ways I never could. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was my supervisor from the hospital, David Reynolds. We'd only spoken a few times, mostly in passing or during brief staff meetings. His voice was kind but cautious. "Claire, I received a call from your father this morning," he said. "He told me he's concerned about your emotional well-being, suggested you might need a leave of absence, said you've been under a lot of pressure lately." I felt my stomach tighten. The kind of cold pressure that doesn't numb, it crystallizes. My father hadn't called because he was worried. He called because he thought he could control me. If he couldn't reach me through guilt or obligation, he'd try to paint me unstable. But David, he didn't take the bait. "I just wanted to check in with you directly," he said. I told him, "I've seen nothing but professionalism from you, but I figured you should know." I thanked him, hung up, and stood there for a long time staring at nothing. The audacity of it, the shift from neglect to manipulation, hit harder than I expected. My family wasn't trying to mend anything. They were trying to manage the narrative. They weren't reaching for me. They were reaching for the version of me that had always absorbed the damage and smiled anyway. That version no longer existed. And as the sun dipped behind the Denver skyline, casting long shadows across my apartment floor, I realized something with complete clarity. If they couldn't own their silence, they would try to silence me. But they were already too late. The story had begun unraveling without me, and I had no intention of stitching it back together. The smear campaign came next, quiet, subtle, wrapped in concern. A cousin I hadn't heard from since Aaron's first gallery opening sent a vague text, "Hey, love, just thinking about you. If you ever want to get away, I've got a yoga retreat code for Sedona. Might help with the stress." No mention of Christmas. No mention of what had actually happened. Just another attempt to reframe the story in their favor. Within days, it became clear they weren't trying to reach me. They were trying to reach everyone around me. Messages trickled in from extended family. Not direct accusations, but polished insinuations. "Claire's just going through a rough patch. She's isolating herself. We're worried about her mental state." Their words weren't born from concern. They were defense mechanisms. If they could shape how others saw me, they wouldn't have to confront how they'd treated me. The kindness in their voices felt like sugar, poured over glass, sweet but sharp when you stepped wrong. I didn't respond. Not to the texts, not to the calls, not to the shallow invitations for coffee whenever you're ready to talk. I wasn't ready to talk because I finally understood there was nothing left to explain. The narrative had shifted, not because I'd fought back, but because I'd stepped away. They were grasping at a version of me that no longer fit inside their story, and that scared them. Not my absence, my refusal to play the role. That winter, I worked longer hours at the hospital, not to escape, but because I felt more present there than I ever had in my own family. I sat with patients whose families came with flowers and warm hands, and with those whose rooms remained painfully quiet. I stayed with them anyway. I knew what it was to feel unseen. I saw them, and they saw me. One evening, just after sunset, I returned home to find a package at my door. No return address. My name written in neat slanted script I didn't immediately recognize. I carried it inside, sat at my desk, and opened it slowly, almost reverently. Inside was thick ivory stationery. The letter was from Maya. Her handwriting was delicate, deliberate, every line pressed with care. She wrote about her grandmother, a woman I had treated last year, how she still went to the farmer's market every Saturday, how she remembered the doctor who stayed past visiting hours, who held her hand when the pain meds wore off, who saw her as a person, not just a diagnosis. "You didn't just save her life," Maya wrote. "You reminded her that she was still living." I read those words 3 times. My hands trembled not with grief, but with the fragile shock of being seen. I looked around my quiet apartment at the untouched tree in the corner, the lights still unplugged, the gifts still stacked in the closet. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt real. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew this something had shifted, and this time it wasn't about them. It was about me. I framed Maya's letter that night, not because I needed validation, but because for once someone had spoken the truth aloud. I hung it above my desk, where the morning light could touch it, right above the spot where I used to pin reminder notes for everyone but myself. The handwriting, still slightly smudged at the edges, felt more sincere than anything my family had offered me in years. It wasn't just a thank you, it was a mirror, a reminder that I mattered beyond my usefulness, that my presence had weight even if the people closest to me never saw it. The next few days passed in slow quiet, not heavy, not sad, just calm. I made coffee in silence, let the snow pile up without rushing to clear it, answered only the calls I wanted to take. The peace didn't feel performative. It felt earned. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, another email arrived. This one was shorter, less polished, more desperate. The subject line read, "We miss you." Inside, the message danced around the idea of regret without ever landing on it. There was no apology, no real acknowledgement of what had happened, just vague phrases about misunderstandings and the hope that the door wasn't closed forever. But buried near the end was the real reason they'd reached out again. "Please ask Maya to take down her post. It's hurting Aaron's career. His agent is getting questions, and potential collaborators are pulling back." There it was clear as ever. It had never been about me, not about love, not about reconciliation, just the consequences of losing control. They weren't concerned with healing. They were panicking about image, about the ripples my absence had created in the story they had worked so hard to keep polished. I didn't respond. I didn't even finish reading the message. I simply closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, staring up at the framed letter on the wall. You reminded her that she was still living. The words echoed quietly like a promise I had made to myself without even knowing it, that I wouldn't go back, that I wouldn't let guilt trick me into shrinking again, that I wouldn't carry responsibility that was never mine to hold. Later that evening, I sat by the window, a warm mug of tea in my hands, watching as the street below slowly disappeared beneath fresh snowfall. The city lights blurred into watercolor. I felt untethered, but not lost. I was no longer clinging to a version of family that asked me to break myself just to belong. And as the wind pressed softly against the glass, I knew something else was coming. Not from them, but from within. A reckoning, or maybe finally a release. Mid-January in Denver always carries a kind of stillness, not just from the snow, but from the way the cold settles into everything. The windows in my apartment frosted over the kind of frost you could trace shapes into with your fingertip. That Sunday, the kind of quiet gray afternoon when time feels thick, I sat at my desk, charting patient notes, the soft hum of the radiator steady beneath it all. My tea had gone cold beside me, untouched. I was deep in a note about a patient's memory lapses when I heard it a knock. Gentle, uncertain. I froze. There was only one person who knocked like that. I stood, walked slowly to the door, and looked through the peephole. And there they were, my mother, my father, Aaron, all bundled in winter coats, their expressions tight with forced warmth. My mother clutched her purse like it might hold all the right words. Aaron shifted from foot to foot like he wanted to disappear. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tense. I didn't open the door. I didn't move. I just stood there watching them through the glass. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. The panic that used to rise in me at the sight of them was gone. What replaced it was something quieter, heavier, an aching sadness. Not the sadness of missing them, but the sadness of knowing exactly why they were here. They weren't here for me. They were here for the version of me they once counted on, the one who would have opened the door before they finished knocking, apologized for something that wasn't her fault, and offered forgiveness just to keep the peace. But that woman didn't live here anymore. I cracked the door only an inch, just enough to let the cold slip in, but not enough to welcome them through. My mother's voice came first, soft, practiced. "Claire, we just want to talk." I didn't answer right away. I watched my father's eyes flicker with impatience, Aaron's jaw tighten. There was no warmth in their gaze, only urgency. I gave them a single word. No, not harsh, not cruel, just final. My mother's face fell stunned. My father's lips pressed into a thin line. Aaron looked away. I closed the door, not as a punishment, but as a boundary, and I locked it with a calm I never thought I'd feel. I walked back to my desk, the radiator humming again, like it had never stopped. Outside, I heard muffled voices rise and fall, pleading, frustrated. But I didn't listen. I didn't hover. I didn't ache. I sat down, wrapped my hands around my cold tea, and looked up at the letter on the wall. The one person who had seen me for who I was hadn't knocked. She had written, and somehow that meant more. I didn't know how long they stayed on the porch, but I knew this. I wasn't afraid of their leaving. I was more afraid of forgetting what it had taken to finally say no. Days turned into weeks. The snow began to melt, revealing sidewalks and streets that had been buried for too long, just like parts of me. I no longer waited for calls or checked old text threads. I cooked real meals. I took long walks through the quiet parts of the city. My apartment, once just a place to rest between hospital shifts, now felt like home because I had finally made space for myself in it. The letter from Maya stayed on the wall, catching sunlight every morning, like a small, steady truth. I hadn't just survived the silence. I'd grown inside of it. What once felt like rejection now felt like release. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who teach us how to choose ourselves. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with cruelty. It often comes wrapped in expectation. Loyalty isn't submission. It's love that includes you too. And rebirth often begins with a quiet no. Life lesson. You don't have to keep proving your worth to people who only love the version of you that serves them. Walk away if you must. Sometimes peace is the reward for your silence, and growth is the gift you give yourself. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, share your experience, and don't forget to subscribe. Sometimes telling your story is how someone else finds their voice.